Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the English Learning Podcast, where we help you improve your English speaking skills in a fun and practical way. I'm Jason, your host, and joining me today is my wonderful co-host, Julia.
Hey, Jason. Hi, everyone. We're so happy to have you here. Today, we're talking about a very common problem that many English learners face. They can understand English, but they can't speak fluently. Does this sound like you?
Yes, a lot of learners can watch movies, listen to podcasts, and even read books in English. But when it comes to speaking, they freeze. They struggle to find the right words, and sometimes they feel too nervous to even try.
That's right, Jason. And if this happens to you, don't worry. You are not alone. This is a very normal stage in learning any language. The good news is, you can overcome it, and today we're going to show you exactly how.
In this episode, we'll talk about why this happens and, most importantly, what you can do to start speaking English more naturally and confidently. We'll also share practical techniques that you can start using today.
By the end of this episode, you'll know how to break through the fear of speaking and finally start using English in real conversations. So, are you ready?
Let's get started. So, Julia, let's get into it. Why do so many people understand English well but struggle to speak?
That's a great question, Jason. There are actually several reasons why this happens. The first and biggest reason is fear of making mistakes. Many learners worry about saying the wrong thing or using incorrect grammar, so they just stay quiet.
Yes, and I totally understand that fear. But here's the truth. Mistakes are part of learning. No one speaks perfectly in the beginning. Even native speakers make mistakes.
Exactly. And the second reason is lack of speaking practice. A lot of learners spend most of their time listening and reading, which are great for understanding English, but they don't actually practice speaking.
Right. It's like learning to swim just by watching videos but never getting into the water. You won't really improve until you start speaking.
That's a perfect example. Another big problem is overthinking grammar. Many learners try to make every sentence perfect in their head before they speak, but by the time they're ready, the conversation has already moved on.
That's so true. Instead of focusing too much on grammar, it's better to just speak naturally and correct mistakes later. What's another reason people struggle to speak?
Well, another reason is that many learners don't have an English-speaking environment. They might live in a country where people don't speak English, so they don't get daily practice.
Yes, that's a big challenge. But the good news is, you don't need to live in an English-speaking country to improve your speaking. There are ways to create your own practice environment, which we'll talk about later in this episode.
That's right. So, to summarize, people struggle to speak English because of fear of mistakes, lack of practice overthinking grammar, and not having an English-speaking environment. But don't worry, we're going to help you overcome all of these problems.
Absolutely! And first, let's talk about one of the biggest barriers, the fear of making mistakes. How can we overcome this fear? Let's discuss that next. All right, now let's talk about one of the biggest reasons why people don't speak, the fear of making mistakes. Julia, why do you think so many learners feel this way?
That's a great question, Jason. I think the main reason is that many learners are afraid of being judged. They worry that people will laugh at them or think they're not smart if they say something wrong.
Yes, and that fear can be really strong. I've met many English learners who say, I don't want to speak because my grammar isn't perfect, or I might pronounce something wrong. But honestly, no one expects you to be perfect.
Exactly. Think about how kids learn to speak. They make tons of mistakes, but no one laughs at them. Instead, they keep trying, and that's how they get better. It's the same for English learners.
That's such a good point. And actually, Many native speakers don't even notice small grammar mistakes. They just focus on understanding what you mean.
Yes, but I get it. Fear can still be hard to overcome, so one great way to reduce fear is to change your mindset. Instead of thinking, I might make a mistake, think, every mistake helps me learn.
I love that. And here's another tip: start small. If you feel nervous about speaking, don't start with long conversations. Just try saying 1 or 2 sentences at a time.
That's a great idea. You can also practice speaking alone first. Stand in front of a mirror and talk about your day in English. No one is listening, so there's no pressure.
Yes. And another fun technique is recording yourself. Speak about a simple topic, listen to your recording, and try again. You'll see improvement over time, and that will boost your confidence.
That's such a useful tip, Jason. And most importantly, be kind to yourself. No one learns a language overnight. The key is to keep speaking, keep making mistakes, and keep learning.
Absolutely! The more mistakes you make, the faster you improve. So instead of being afraid, embrace your mistakes. Now, let's move on to another big reason why people struggle to speak: the difference between passive learning and active learning. So, we've talked about the fear of making mistakes. Now, let's discuss another reason why many learners struggle to speak: the difference between passive learning and active speaking. Julia, what do we mean by that?
Great question. Jason, passive learning is when you're just receiving information. For example, watching English videos, listening to podcasts, or reading books. These activities help you understand English, but they don't help you speak.
Right. And on the other hand, active speaking means actually using English, practicing speaking, having conversations, and forming sentences in real time. That's the only way to improve fluency.
Exactly. The problem is that many learners spend 90% of their time on passive learning and almost no time on active speaking. So they understand English but can't speak fluently.
Yes, it's like learning to play guitar by only watching videos. You might know how to play, but until you actually pick up the guitar and practice, you won't be able to do it.
That's a great example, Jason, and I totally get it. Passive learning feels comfortable. There's no pressure, no mistakes. But if you want to speak English fluently, you have to get out of your comfort zone and start speaking.
Absolutely. And here's something interesting. Studies show that people remember 90% of what they actively do, but only 10 to 20% of what they just listen to or read. So, if you're only watching and listening, you're missing out on real improvement.
Wow, that's so important to know. But Jason, what are some practical ways learners can move from passive learning to active speaking?
Great question. One simple method is shadowing. Listen to a sentence from a podcast or video and repeat it immediately. This helps with pronunciation and fluency.
That's a great tip. Another idea is thinking in English. Instead of translating in your head, try describing what you're doing in English throughout the day.
I love that. And one more. Speak out loud every day, even if you're alone. Talk about your day, describe what you see, or even have a fake conversation with yourself.
Yes, the key is to train your brain to speak, not just listen. The more you practice actively, the faster your speaking skills will improve.
Exactly. So, now that we understand the difference between passive learning and active speaking, let's move on to another important topic: how to train your brain to think in English. So we've talked about the importance of active speaking. Now, let's discuss something just as important: the role of environment in speaking English. Julia, how does the environment affect language learning?
That's a great question, Jason. Your environment plays a huge role in how fast you improve. If you're surrounded by English speakers, you naturally hear and use English every day. But if you live in a place where no one speaks English, it's much harder to practice.
That's so true. Many learners tell me, I don't have anyone to practice with. And I understand that. It's difficult when English isn't spoken in your daily life.
Exactly. But the good news is, you don't need to live in an English-speaking country to create an English-rich environment.
Yes, there are so many ways to bring English into your daily life. Julia, what are some simple things learners can do?
One of the best things you can do is change your phone and social media language to English. This forces you to see and read English every day.
That's a great idea. Another one is listening to English music, podcasts, and audiobooks while doing daily activities like cooking, walking, or driving.
Yes, and here's a fun tip. Talk to yourself in English. You don't need a partner. Just describe what you're doing out loud or even have imaginary conversations.
I love that. And if you want real interaction, you can join online English communities, language exchange apps, or even find a speaking partner on social media.
Exactly. The key is to surround yourself with English as much as possible. Even if you're not in an English-speaking country, you can still create an English-speaking environment.
That's so true. So, now that we know how to build the right environment, let's talk about something even more important: how to turn speaking practice into a daily habit. So far, we've talked about why some learners struggle to speak, the role of the environment, and how to build good speaking habits. Now, let's dive into some powerful techniques to improve speaking fluency. Julia, what's one of the best techniques you recommend?
One of my favorites is the shadowing technique. It's simple but really effective. You listen to a native speaker and repeat what they say immediately, copying their pronunciation and intonation.
That's a fantastic method. It helps improve fluency, pronunciation, and confidence. And the best part? You can do it with podcasts, movies, or even YouTube videos.
Exactly. Another great technique is thinking in English. Many learners translate from their native language first, and that slows them down. Instead, try describing what you see around you directly in English, like, I am making coffee. The sky is blue today.
I love that. It forces your brain to process English naturally instead of translating. And speaking of natural speaking, another great technique is storytelling.
Oh, that's a good one. How does storytelling help with fluency?
Well, when you tell a story, you practice forming full sentences and expressing ideas smoothly. Try telling a short personal story, or even making up a simple story based on a picture.
That's such a fun way to practice. Another powerful technique is recording yourself speaking. It might feel awkward at first, but when you listen to your own voice, you can notice your mistakes and improve your pronunciation and fluency.
That's a great tip, Julia. And here's another one. Ask and answer questions out loud. You can pretend you're in a conversation and answer common questions like, "What did you do today?" Or, "What's your favorite movie and why?"
Yes, the more you practice real conversations, the more natural speaking will feel. And don't forget, speak every day even if it's just for 5 minutes. Consistency is key.
Absolutely. The more you speak, the more fluent you become. Now, let's wrap things up by talking about the mindset shift needed to become a confident English speaker. We've covered some great techniques for improving fluency, but many learners still struggle with confidence and anxiety when speaking English. Julia, why do you think this happens?
That's a great question, Jason. A lot of learners feel nervous because they're afraid of making mistakes, being judged, or not finding the right words. But here's the truth. Mistakes are part of learning.
Exactly. Nobody speaks perfectly from the beginning. Even native speakers make mistakes. But if you let fear stop you, you'll never improve. The key is to change your mindset.
Right? Instead of thinking, what if I make a mistake? Try thinking, every mistake is a step toward fluency.
I love that. And one of the best ways to build confidence is to start small. You don't need to have a full conversation right away. Just say a few sentences to yourself or practice with a friend.
Yes, and here's a simple but powerful trick. Slow down when you speak. Many learners think they have to speak fast to sound fluent, but fluency isn't about speed. It's about clarity.
That's so true. And another great tip is positive self-talk. Instead of saying, "My English is bad," say, "I'm improving every day." Your mindset affects your confidence.
Exactly. And don't forget, expose yourself to English conversations as much as possible. The more you listen and speak, the more comfortable you'll feel.
Absolutely. Confidence comes from action. The more you practice, the less anxious you'll feel. So, now let's wrap up with our final thoughts on overcoming the understand but can't speak problem. So, we've covered a lot today. We talked about why many learners understand English but can't speak, the psychological barriers, the difference between passive and active learning, and techniques to improve fluency and confidence. Julia, what's the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
The biggest takeaway is this: speaking English is a skill, not just knowledge. The more you practice, the more confident and fluent you'll become. Don't wait for the perfect moment to start speaking. Start today.
Yes. And remember, mistakes are part of the journey. Every time you speak, you're improving. Surround yourself with English, practice daily, and keep pushing past your fear.
Exactly. And if you found this episode helpful, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with a friend who's also learning English.
That's right. And for more speaking practice, check out our other episodes where we dive deeper into fluency techniques. Keep practicing, stay confident, and we'll see you in the next episode.